Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cool mist of the marshes, where a boy named Pip is about to encounter terror, kindness, and the quiet machinery of fate. You're standing in the damp mud of the Kent countryside. The river glistens like steel. A gray sky hangs low. Wind sighs through rushes. And suddenly, from behind a tombstone, a convict lunges out of the shadows. You probably won't survive this night if your heart isn't steady. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little book club travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Pip Philip Pirrup is a small, orphan boy raised by his resentful older sister and her kindly blacksmith husband, Joe Gargery. He lives in the marshy regions of Kent, England, around the early 19th century. The story begins not in grandeur or glory, but in fear. While visiting his parents' graves one cold evening, Pip encounters an escaped convict hiding among the tombstones. The man is ragged, starving, and desperate. He terrifies Pip into stealing food and a file to saw off his leg irons. Pip complies, trembling with guilt and fear, sneaking the items from Joe's modest home. This act of reluctant kindness will echo far beyond the marshes. Later, the convict is captured again, but surprisingly, he protects Pip, claiming he stole the food himself. This moment, small yet monumental, lays the foundation for a web of moral debts, mistaken identities, and the mysterious forces that shape lives. Pip's domestic life is grim. His sister, Mrs. Joe, is harsh and physically abusive, frequently reminding Pip that she's brought him up by hand. Joe, the blacksmith, is kind-hearted but uneducated and simple, offering Pip the only warmth in a cold household. One day, Pip is summoned to visit Miss Havisham, a reclusive, wealthy old woman who lives in a decaying mansion called Satis House. Pip's uncle, Pumblechook, arranges it, thinking the eccentric lady might take a liking to the boy. Miss Havisham is unlike anyone Pip has ever met. She sits in a faded wedding dress, surrounded by rotting bridal cake and stopped clocks, frozen at the exact moment she was jilted on her wedding day decades ago. At Satis House, Pip meets Estella, Miss Havisham's adopted daughter. Estella is beautiful, proud, and scornful. She mocks Pip for his coarse hands and unrefined manners, making him feel low and ashamed of his humble upbringing. Pip, though hurt, becomes infatuated. Her beauty and coldness stir something restless in him. From this moment on, Pip's worldview begins to warp. He sees Joe's blacksmithing as vulgar. His own home, once simple and safe, feels beneath him. Satis House has introduced him not just to wealth, but to the idea of social aspiration and, crucially, the painful desire to become someone he is not. Pip continues to visit Miss Havisham and Estella, believing he is being groomed for some future fortune. Miss Havisham seems to encourage this, with cryptic words and gestures that suggest a plan beyond Pip's grasp. All the while, She seems to be training Estella to break hearts, shaping her into a weapon of feminine power and emotional detachment. She stokes Pip's hopes, fueling the illusion that he might someday marry Estella. Back in the marshes, life moves forward. Pip becomes Joe's apprentice, learning the trade of blacksmithing. But now the forge feels like a prison. Pip's heart is no longer in the fire and hammer. He yearns for refinement, for city life, for Estella, and for transformation. He dreams of great expectations. But then, fate arrives again, this time in the form of a lawyer named Jaggers. Jaggers informs Pip that he has come into a large fortune from an anonymous benefactor. Pip is to be taken to London, educated, and raised as a gentleman. His future is no longer forged in iron and soot. It will be tailored in silk and silver. Pip, naturally, assumes Miss Havisham is his benefactress. After all, who else could it be? She's rich, eccentric, and already woven into his destiny. His heart leaps with the thought that she is preparing him for Estella, that every pain he's endured has been part of a grand design. Before leaving for London, Pip parts awkwardly with Joe, now embarrassed by his former father figure's lack of polish. There's a subtle ache in their goodbye. Joe's eyes soft with love, Pip's thoughts clouded with shame. What Pip doesn't yet realize is that the systems he's stepping into, the machinery of London society, are built on appearances, secrets, and manipulation. His transformation will cost more than he can imagine. He travels to the city with the wide-eyed awe of a country boy, part excitement, part fear. London, he's told, is the heart of the empire, a place of money and manners, where destiny is rewritten daily. But as we'll see soon, what glitters in London is often merely polished brass. For now, Pip's great expectations are no longer just hopes. They've become a mysterious contract signed in shadows. The marshes may be behind him, but the mud still clings to his boots. His past is not done with him yet, and neither is the convict. Pip settles into London life, but the city greets him not with grandeur, but with a tangle of contradictions. The air is thick with smoke, the streets echo with cartwheels and clattering hooves, and the skyline is stitched together with chimneys and shadows. The promise of transformation floats just out of reach. Though he has wealth and promise, Pip soon realizes that being a gentleman is not a title, but a performance, one that demands constant rehearsal. Mr. Jaggers, Pip's new guardian, is a fearsome lawyer whose very presence unsettles. He seems to understand society not as a place of virtue, but as a game of leverage. Jaggers is cold, calculating, and powerful, his office crowded with strange artifacts, and his clerk, Wemmick, a man of many faces. Wemmick lives a double life, stern and mechanical at work, sweet and affectionate at home. Through him, Pip begins to understand the fragmented identities people carry in society, masks worn to survive within systems that do not reward sincerity. Pip moves into lodgings with Herbert Pocket, a cheerful and optimistic young man who gently helps Pip navigate the nuances of upper-class behavior. Herbert teaches him how to eat politely, how to dress, how to speak with affected nonchalance, the unspoken rules of being somebody. But beneath Herbert's good humor lies struggle. He's from a genteel but impoverished family. His own expectations are as elusive as Pip's, though he bears them with more grace. Estella, too, enters London society. Pip continues to orbit her, though she remains distant. She's elegant, practiced, untouchable. She warns him in her own way not to love her. But Pip cannot help himself. Her coldness only deepens his desire. He believes her to be the prize at the end of his transformation. Miss Havisham reappears in his life now and then, and Pip clings to the idea that she is preparing Estella for him. She encourages this unspoken belief, all while pushing Estella into society's drawing rooms, turning her into a glittering object for the world to desire. Miss Havisham's vendetta against men, born from heartbreak, is now being acted out through Estella, a tragic inheritance, passed like a candle lighting another wick. London, for all its opportunity, grows heavy with pretense. Pip begins spending freely, falling into debt with little awareness of consequence. He buys fine clothes, attends dinners, acts the part. Yet beneath the polished boots and waistcoats, he feels hollow. The money has changed how others treat him, but not who he is. Even Joe, when visiting from the marshes, becomes an embarrassment. Pip feels ashamed, noticing Joe's rough hands, his awkward speech. And yet, Joe's kindness remains pure, unchanged. This shame cuts deeply. For all his striving, Pip begins to suspect that gentlemanliness is not a condition of the heart, but a costume stitched by wealth. Social mobility, he learns, is not about merit or morality. It's about illusion. It's about belonging to the theater of class and power. Pip's expectations, though materialized, are built on an invisible scaffold. He knows neither the source of his fortune nor the rules of the game he's been entered into. The more he plays along, the more he senses that he's been cast into a role in someone else's script. That illusion shatters when, one stormy night, the past knocks, literally, on his door. A ragged man steps from the shadows. It's the convict, Magwitch. Pip recoils in horror. This man, this coarse, sweating, hunted figure, is his true benefactor. Not Miss Havisham, not some grand, romantic plan, but a fugitive who, out of gratitude for that boy on the marshes, vowed to make him into a gentleman. Everything Pip believed about himself is suddenly false. His education, his rise, his elegance, it's all been paid for by a man he once pitied and feared. And Magwitch, having risked death to return from exile and see what he's made of Pip, now sees the revulsion in Pip's eyes. The moment is a quiet tragedy. The social mask slips. Pip is horrified not just by Magwitch's appearance, but by what it says about him. He has become a gentleman through crime money, through blood-soaked currency. His elegant life is suddenly built on the same mud he thought he had escaped. The revelation sends Pip into a spiral. He questions everything, his assumptions, his values, his desires. Even Estella begins to look different in this new light. This marks a turning point. The glitter of London dulls. The air grows heavier. Pip no longer moves through society with naive ambition. He begins to see the latticework of illusion and manipulation that props it up. Magwitch tells a story, a life of poverty, of injustice, of being hunted by a society that labels and condemns the poor without mercy. He speaks of Compeyson, a gentleman who betrayed him and received a lighter sentence because of his fine clothes and polished speech. Here, Dickens lays bare the brutal machinery of class injustice. It's not just about birth or money. It's about the systems that punish the desperate and reward the cunning. Pip begins to soften toward Magwitch. He sees the man's humanity, his sorrow, his strange, fatherly pride. The relationship between them deepens, not just a benefactor and a recipient, but a kind of twisted paternal bond, forged through gratitude, fear, and now mutual recognition. But danger follows Magwitch. Compeyson, the true villain, has returned. The authorities are hunting Magwitch. Pip must now protect the man who made him, even as his world collapses. The story shifts from self-absorption to responsibility. Pip's growth begins not in wealth, but in the shedding of illusions. He starts to realize that becoming a true gentleman has nothing to do with money or manners. It means loyalty. It means love. It means sacrifice. And Pip, for the first time, begins to live not for himself, but for someone else. The fire of illusion is burning low, and Pip stands in the flickering light, watching the shape of truth emerge from its shadows. Now aware of Magwitch's role in his transformation, Pip experiences a seismic shift. What he once saw as destiny now feels like debt. What he once prized, his gentlemanly status, has soured with the knowledge of its origin. But Pip does not run. He does not denounce the man who upended his world. Instead, he begins the slow, painful work of repaying a moral obligation, not out of fear or duty, but out of an emerging sense of empathy and dignity. Pip makes arrangements to hide Magwitch, who is now in grave danger. Returning to England after transportation is punishable by death. But Magwitch returned not to flee justice, but to see Pip, to bask in the fruit of his sacrifice. And Pip, though shaken, cannot turn away from that. The world around Pip grows colder. He distances himself from his old life, the clubs, the dinners, the frivolous debts that now weigh like stones in his conscience. Pip realizes that he has been complicit in a performance, a masquerade of virtue purchased with ill-gotten gold. The great expectations that once swelled in his heart now dissolve into quiet resolve. He is no longer chasing society's approval. He is trying to become human. Around this moral journey, the plot thickens. Pip learns that Estella is to marry Bentley Drummle, a cruel, brutish man who masks his savagery behind social polish. Drummle is everything wrong with the upper class distilled into one sneering presence. Pip is devastated. He confronts Estella, begging her to consider her own unhappiness. But Estella, raised by Miss Havisham to be unfeeling, admits she has no heart left to break. Their exchange is bitter, and Pip walks away not with anger, but with a deeper sense of sorrow. Estella was never his to have. She was a symbol, a dream sculpted by longing and class ambition. And now she is choosing ruin over love, because that is all she knows. At the same time, the threads of fate begin to converge. Pip uncovers a staggering truth. Estella is Magwitch's daughter. The convict, long ago, loved a wild woman, a murderer who gave birth to Estella and handed her off to Miss Havisham. This revelation, twisting the fates of all three central characters, feels like a thunderclap in the soul of the story. Miss Havisham, upon learning of Pip's pain and Estella's marriage, begins to unravel. She is no longer the bitter spider at the center of her dusty web, but a broken woman crushed under the weight of her own manipulations. In a moment of rare vulnerability, she begs Pip for forgiveness. He gives it quietly, simply, without spectacle. Soon after, Miss Havisham dies in a fire. The image of her flaming figure, wedding dress aflame, arms outstretched, is one of the most haunting in all of Dickens. A symbol consumed by her own hate. A bride still waiting for a day that never came. As Pip tends to Magwitch, hiding him along the river with the help of Herbert, his empathy deepens. He begins to see in the old convict not just a man, but a soul, a person shaped by pain and injustice. Dickens does not redeem Magwitch with sentimentality. He remains rough, sometimes violent, always dangerous. But he is humanized through suffering. And Pip, once disgusted by him, now cherishes him. They make plans to escape. Pip and Herbert plot to smuggle Magwitch out of the country by boat. The tension grows like a slow tide. Every knock at the door, every face in the crowd, might signal discovery. Pip is no longer thinking of himself. He is risking everything for someone else. But the attempt fails. Magwitch is captured, and in the struggle, he is gravely injured. His fate is sealed. In prison, dying and awaiting execution, Magwitch listens as Pip tells him about Estella, about how she lives, how beautiful she has become, how much she is loved. Magwitch's final moments are filled not with bitterness, but with quiet satisfaction. Pip holds his hand as he passes, no longer repelled, but mourning. This moment, unadorned yet piercing, becomes a turning point in Pip's arc. He has lost everything: his money, his social status, his illusions. But in that loss, he finds something more durable: compassion. Pip himself falls ill soon after. He is destitute, delirious, and alone. The debts he ignored now return to haunt him. But then, in the soft light of suffering, Joe appears. Joe, who was once an embarrassment, a symbol of the life Pip tried to shed, now becomes his savior. He nurses Pip through his illness, pays off his debts, and does it all without judgment. He never asks for thanks. He never mentions the past. He simply loves. This quiet act of goodness breaks Pip open. The prodigal son has returned, not to celebration, but to grace. Pip realizes how deeply he wronged Joe, how foolish his ambitions were. He begins to make amends, not with grand gestures, but with small steps. He returns to the marshes, the forge, the simple life. And in that simplicity, he begins to heal. His great expectations are gone, but in their place is a deeper understanding. Life is not about what you attain, but how you treat others along the way. He finds purpose not in wealth, but in repair, in building bridges, in seeking forgiveness, in tending to those left behind. The story might seem to end here, with the fall of pride, the return to humility, but Dickens, ever the master of social observation, is not done yet. As the dust of Pip's journey settles, we begin to see more than just a personal transformation. We begin to see the mechanisms that shaped him, the cultural forces, the societal traps, the seductive promise of class mobility. This is no longer just Pip's story. It's a mirror, and Dickens is inviting us to look. Remember the boy on the marshes, trembling before a ragged stranger? That same boy, after all the glitter and grief, stands now with bare hands and an unburdened soul. The journey from innocence to ambition, from ambition to disillusionment, and from disillusionment to clarity has left him hollowed, but not empty. In fact, there's more of Pip now than ever before. What has been stripped from him, status, illusion, imagined destiny, reveals something sturdier underneath. Conscience, humility, and truth. But first, the shadows must finish their work. With Magwitch gone, and Joe having returned to his forge, Pip finds himself suspended in a quiet grief, not dramatic, but lingering like mist. He reflects on all he once chased: Estella, prestige, wealth, and all he cast aside in the process. His debts are cleared by Joe, not because Pip deserved it, but because Joe is incapable of withholding love. That Pip begins to understand is what true nobility looks like. Pip journeys to Satis House once more, only to find ruins. Miss Havisham's estate, once frozen in time, is now being dismantled and sold off. The great chandeliers, the dusty cake, the clock stopped at heartbreak, all gone. Pip finds Estella there, changed. She is no longer the gleaming statue of Miss Havisham's design, but a woman marked by suffering. Her marriage to Drummle has left her bruised, perhaps not physically, but in the soul. The emotional detachment Miss Havisham carved into her has become a prison, and yet Estella too is awakening. There is a softened grief in her now, the beginning of self-awareness. The two speak, not as lovers, not even as old friends, but as survivors of the same strange storm. Pip doesn't declare his love again. He doesn't plead. He simply stands with her in the quiet of the crumbling house, the ghosts of their old lives fading around them. There are multiple endings to great expectations, depending on the edition. In one, they part ways forever, never to reunite. In the more familiar version, they meet again years later, walking in the twilight of Satis House's ruins, their pain weathered and shared. Dickens leaves their future ambiguous. There are no grand reconciliations, no kisses or vows. Just two people, older, changed, and at peace. Pip no longer dreams of possessing Estella. He wishes simply to walk beside her as equals. And that is perhaps the truest resolution. Not triumph, not romance, but understanding. What began as a story about rising above one's class ends not in glory, but in grace. Pip has learned that to become a gentleman, in the moral sense, requires no inheritance. No fortune, only kindness, only responsibility, only love. Now, with the plot behind us, let's pause and take a long breath together. Because Great Expectations is more than a coming-of-age tale, more than a critique of social mobility. It is a meditation on how people are shaped, not just by what they choose, but by what is chosen for them, and how they slowly, sometimes painfully, come to recognize the difference. Let's return to Pip's first encounter with Magwitch. Think about that moment again. A boy, small and afraid, offers kindness out of terror, but that action ripples outward for decades. Dickens is telling us something fundamental: systems of power, of justice, of class. These are vast and impersonal, but within them, small human acts matter. They change things. When Pip gives the food, he is not thinking of consequences, but the consequence is a life transformed, his own and Magwitch's. Inversely, Miss Havisham's decision to raise Estella as a tool of vengeance ripples outward in pain. Her bitterness poisons others. One woman's frozen grief becomes a generational curse. Here, Dickens reveals his deepest insight. Systems don't just reside in government or courtrooms. They live inside us, in our resentments, in our ambitions, in our desire to control others, and breaking free from them. Awakening requires not rebellion, but recognition. Pip's awakening is slow, painful. It isn't heroic. He doesn't slay dragons. He doesn't marry the princess. He simply learns to see, to really see, the people around him, to stop chasing the illusions that society teaches us to worship: wealth, beauty, pedigree, and instead to hold tightly to loyalty, honesty, and remorse. Magwitch's story, too, demands a deeper lens. Dickens crafts in him a figure both monstrous and magnificent. He is a criminal, yes, but one shaped by cruelty, poverty, and abandonment. His gestures are rough, but his heart is deeply human, and his gratitude to Pip, almost absurd in its magnitude, becomes a kind of tragic devotion. In helping Pip rise, he seeks to rewrite his own fate, to forge from the mud a legacy of light. But society does not allow such rewriting. Magwitch is hunted, captured, and condemned not for what he is now, but for what he was. In the machinery of class and law, a poor man's redemption holds little weight. Contrast that with Compeyson, the gentleman who helped ruin Magwitch's life and Miss Havisham's. Because he looks the part, because he speaks well and dresses finely, the courts treat him more gently. This, Dickens seems to scream, is the true crime, that the surface so often matters more than the soul. And what of Estella? Her tragedy lies in being made a symbol. Miss Havisham uses her to carry out revenge, not realizing that by removing her ability to feel, she has robbed her of agency. Estella is not wicked. She is lost. She is what happens when love is replaced with manipulation. Her arc is not about redemption, but reclamation, reclaiming the ability to feel pain, to mourn, to choose. As for Joe, he is the quiet hero, patient, kind, and unchanging. He is not educated. He is not rich, but he loves purely. His forgiveness, given freely, without demand, is the single most powerful act in the book. Through him, Dickens tells us that character is not built in parlors or salons, but in forges and kitchens, in showing up again and again, even when unappreciated. By the end, Pip has passed through the furnace, not the forge of Joe's anvil, but the emotional forge of loss and reckoning. He emerges not victorious, but refined. He has become someone who sees the systems for what they are and chooses quietly to live by a different code. By now, you may feel it too, that soft ache Dickens threads through every page of Great Expectations. It is not the ache of romance or ambition, but of awakening. As Pip walks the final miles of his journey, the world no longer dazzles him. It humbles him, and through that humility, a deeper kind of greatness emerges. Not one forged in estates and inheritances, but in silence, in simplicity, in how we care for each other when no one is watching. Let's spend a little more time in the aftermath of Pip's fall, because it is here that the novel's quieter brilliance blooms. Once fevered with delusion, Pip now moves gently through the world. He returns home, not as a hero, but as a man seeking restoration. Joe and Biddy, now married, live in warmth and contentment. Their home is modest, filled with the sound of children's footsteps, the crackle of the hearth, and the kind of peace Pip never found in the glittering halls of London. It is not merely a homecoming, it is a reckoning. Pip apologizes without pride. He thanks without guilt. He begins to see that forgiveness is not a right, but a gift, and Joe offers it without hesitation. Here, Dickens crafts a subtle reversal. The blacksmith's forge, once a symbol of everything Pip wanted to escape, becomes a sanctuary. Not because it changed, but because Pip has. His values have reoriented. He no longer measures life in terms of upward movement. He no longer mistakes status for substance. This transformation is perhaps the novel's most vital point. Great Expectations is not about getting what you want. It's about learning what is worth wanting. Still, Pip's evolution is not isolated. Around him, other lives unfold with quiet complexity. Herbert Pocket, always cheerful, ever kind, eventually rises not through fortune, but through effort and character. Pip, invested not as a benefactor, but as a brother, helps Herbert with his career, not as charity, but as a shared triumph. Contrast this with Drummle, Estella's cruel husband, who dies young, his brutality collapsing inward. Drummle is what happens when privilege rots from the inside. A cautionary figure, not punished by others, but corroded by his own nature. And then, of course, there is Estella. Her fate, too, diverges from traditional endings. Dickens does not grant her easy absolution or sweeping romance. Instead, he allows her to suffer, to change, to return. Her time with Drummle has scorched away her armor. She is no longer untouchable, but tender, bruised, yes, but capable now of sorrow and perhaps one day joy. When Pip meets her again in the ruins of Satis House, she is altered. No longer a girl trained to wound, but a woman trying to understand what love might feel like. She admits that the world has taught her through suffering what Miss Havisham tried to teach her by design. In this admission, Estella steps beyond her creator. She becomes her own person. Their final meeting is not romantic in the conventional sense. There is no wedding, no promises. Just two people, changed by time, standing in the ashes of their shared past, holding not hands, but understanding. I saw no shadow of another parting from her. Pip says, and that's all. A whisper, an opening, a quiet hope. This restraint is important. It tells us something profound. Resolution doesn't always come with reward. Sometimes it's just peace. Now let's zoom out, because Great Expectations is not only a tale of personal growth. It is a mirror to the society that shapes, misleads, and sometimes redeems its people. In the world Dickens builds, class is not merely a social marker. It is a system of belief. It tells people what they're worth. It assigns value, often arbitrarily, based on birth, wealth, accent, education. Pip internalizes these ideas early, convinced that being a gentleman means leaving behind the forge, the marshes, the people who love him. But Dickens turns this myth inside out. Every gentleman Pip meets, Compeyson, Drummle, even Jaggers to some degree, is hollowed by cynicism, cruelty, or cold ambition. Their elegance is skin deep. Meanwhile, those the world deems low, Joe, Magwitch, Biddy, act with the most integrity. They give without expectation. They love without condition. They are, in the truest sense, noble. The irony is deliberate. Dickens wants us to see that the structure of Victorian England, its obsession with class, appearance, and pedigree, is a lie. It teaches people to aspire to emptiness, to mimic rather than feel. And it punishes those who cannot or will not play by its rules. Even Jaggers, the towering legal figure, lives in duplicity. He helps Pip. He defends Magwitch. But he also enables a system that dehumanizes people, that processes human suffering like paperwork. His character reminds us that power, even when wielded for good, often requires moral compromise. Wemmick, his clerk, offers a more human alternative. At work, Wemmick is robotic, unsentimental, a cog. But at home, he becomes whimsical, kind, devoted to his aged father. His castle is a fortress of individuality, a place where the machinery of London can't reach. Dickens uses Wemmick to suggest that within rigid systems, we must carve out private sanctuaries, spaces of authenticity where our better selves can survive. Estella, too, embodies this tension. She's a victim of design. Miss Havisham constructs her to be untouchable, unfeeling, a living weapon forged in bitterness. But life refuses to follow blueprints. Estella's suffering breaks the mold. She becomes real, And in doing so, she offers hope that even those shaped by cruelty can become whole. And what a Pip! He ends not with riches or fanfare, but with insight. He has peered behind the curtain of society's promises. He has seen what lies beneath the mask of class and the shimmer of fortune. What remains is a man who can look another in the eye, without shame, without envy, without performance. He is finally present. This, perhaps, is what Dickens means by great expectations. Not a prophecy fulfilled, but an illusion outgrown. Not becoming what the world tells you to be, but unbecoming what you were never meant to chase. Pip's journey teaches us that true growth comes when we stop reaching for the crown and start returning to the soil, to the places, the people, the truths that shaped us, not to reclaim the past, but to reconcile with it. To grow up in Dickens's world is to awaken, to understand that society is built not on fairness, but on form. And yet, within that structure, we can still choose love, still choose forgiveness, still choose to be gentle in a world that rewards the opposite. That quietly is greatness. Estella, the luminous but emotionally elusive young woman raised by Miss Havisham, comes to embody the tangled contradictions of beauty and pain, love and cruelty, hope and heartbreak. Pip's obsession with her, nurtured from the very first time he visits Sada's house, isn't just adolescent infatuation. It's a case study in how society packages status, allure, and emotional unavailability into an irresistible illusion. Estella is not merely a character, but a function, a symbol constructed to devastate, and Pip is its willing victim, raised specifically to wreak vengeance on men for Miss Havisham's heartbreak. Estella is groomed into an elegant but emotionally vacant weapon. Yet, beneath the frost of her manner lies a quiet struggle for personhood. Estella is aware of her condition, of being shaped, molded, denied genuine affection. And at times, she even warns Pip not to love her. But this does nothing to dampen his feelings. In fact, it only intensifies the desire, creating that dangerous blend of unattainable intimacy and romanticized suffering that so often drives real-world obsessions. It's in this paradox that Charles Dickens flexes his understanding of social programming. Estella does not have the luxury of choosing how she loves, and Pip cannot resist loving her despite it. This dynamic mirrors the societal traps that train people to pursue illusions of happiness, status, romance, transformation, without understanding the structures that shape those illusions in the first place. Dickens offers no quick answers, but he embeds a warning. When individuals pursue happiness through society's lenses, they often find only disappointment distorted by desire. Throughout Pip's climb and fall in fortune, Estella remains his fixed point, aloof, immaculate, seemingly above it all. And yet, she too is a victim. The tragedy lies in their inability to truly meet each other. Pip is blinded by aspiration and illusion. Estella is bound by emotional sterility and inner confusion. Their misalignment isn't circumstantial, it's structural. Dickens's rendering of Estella is not to simply create a cruel beauty, but to expose the cruelty in systems that manipulate affections. Estella is born of a revenge plot, but her existence critiques a broader pattern: how society grooms people, especially women, into roles that deny them freedom of emotional authenticity. She is an aristocratic statue, made beautiful but cold, cultured but hollowed out. This theme parallels Pip's own journey. Both he and Estella are shaped by external designs. Miss Havisham's bitterness in her case, and Pip's self-loathing and class ambition in his. They are not merely victims of others' schemes, but also of societal mechanisms that reward surface over substance. In Estella, Dickens captures a haunting truth: that emotional neglect can be inherited, institutionalized, and internalized. Miss Havisham, meanwhile, hovers like a ghost behind all of this. Her influence on Estella is the embodiment of what happens when personal vengeance fuses with societal power. She doesn't merely want Estella to be cold. She wants her to be weaponized. And yet, Miss Havisham's plan ultimately consumes her. In the most chilling scenes, she comes to regret the damage she's caused, her own pain amplified by the mirror Estella holds up to her. There's a painful moment when Estella, not out of cruelty but from lack of feeling, admits that she cannot give Miss Havisham the love she craves. And the older woman realizes too late that she has manufactured the very loneliness she once feared. This feedback loop of damage and dysfunction is part of what elevates Great Expectations from mere melodrama to deep social analysis. Dickens portrays the emotional aftermath of toxic systems, how trauma doesn't just break individuals, but perpetuates through them. When we trace this web through Pip, Estella, and Miss Havisham, we uncover Dickens's grander insight, that society systems don't only govern power and class. They manipulate the very capacity to love, to relate, to feel. At the heart of Estella's character lies another irony. For all her indifference, she too is being used. Her beauty, her poise, her pedigree, they are tools deployed by someone else's grief. Her autonomy is a veneer. When she eventually marries the brutal Drummle, a decision Pip finds incomprehensible, it's not out of passion, but as a fulfillment of a pattern. Estella has learned to align herself with dominance, with control, with the idea of value as prescribed by her environment. She doesn't know how to choose differently because she has never been given space to develop desire apart from performance. Still, Dickens offers a thread of hope, one woven so lightly you might miss it. After years of hardship, Estella softens. Her marriage fails. Drum le dix. Time wears down the sharpness instilled in her. And when she and Pip meet again, older, more weathered, less proud, there is a shift. They no longer represent projections or dreams. They are just two people, tired and truer. In the novel's most debated endings, yes, Dickens wrote too, they either part as friends or there's a hint that they may finally walk into the future together, side by side. In either case, Estella's final incarnation is not one of triumphant love, but of release from roles, from revenge, from manipulation. And Pip, in seeing her thus, also begins to release the illusions that have bound him for so long. Dickens uses Estella to mirror the entire project of Great Expectations. The false lights we chase, the pain we inherit, the systems we unconsciously uphold. Her character is haunting because she is not a villain, but a cipher, a symbol, a casualty. Her arc reminds us that real transformation does not come from status or beauty or even love. It comes from facing what shaped us and choosing, despite everything, to become someone different. So as we drift deeper into this quiet night, let's carry with us Estella's silent ache, her restrained longing, her muted regrets, her softened gaze in the novel's final pages. These aren't just moments of literary catharsis. They are truths about what it means to live inside systems that distort the heart, and about the grace we might find when we step outside them, even if only for a while. Pip, who once dreamed of glittering success, now finds himself encumbered with heavy truths. The weight of reality, Magwitch's past, Estella's coldness, and his own delusions, settles around him like the thick London fog. The gentleman he longed to become is now a hollow image, its frame constructed by another man's sacrifice. Yet as Pip draws closer to the end of his story, that frame begins to crack, and something more genuine, more human, begins to shine through. With Magwitch's life now under legal threat, Pip stays close to the convict who made him a gentleman. He begins to care for Magwitch not as a benefactor or a stepping stone, but as a man who has loved him deeply in his own gruff and silent way. The very idea of high society, once so intoxicating, begins to rot in Pip's mind. He observes, with sharpened clarity, the rigid cruelty of a system that marks some men for punishment and others for privilege, not by their character, but by birth. Magwitch, weakened and imprisoned, shares his story fully. His past with Compayson, the smooth-talking gentleman who betrayed him, his doomed love for Molly, Estella's mother, and the loss of his daughter, all come together in a tapestry woven with suffering. Pip realizes that Estella, the icy beacon of his dreams, is in fact Magwitch's child, raised not in love, but as an experiment in emotional cruelty by Miss Havisham. All threads meet here in a knot of twisted intentions. Pip is devastated, but in this devastation he grows. He no longer seeks greatness, he seeks goodness. He tries to repay Magwitch with dignity, even as the old man's health fades. He tries to save him from execution, to grant him at least one mercy. And as Magwitch lays dying, Pip whispers the truth, that his daughter lives, that she is beautiful, and that she is loved. Magwitch dies at peace. The debts of Pip's Great Expectations are not only emotional. Financial ruin soon follows. The fortune Magwitch left behind is seized by the crown. Pip, unable to pay off his own creditors, falls ill and nearly dies. But here, in his lowest moment, he is saved, not by wealth but by care. Joe Gargery arrives in London, quiet and steadfast, like the blacksmith he's always been. He nurses Pip back to health, forgives his pride, and pays off his debts without fanfare. Their bond is not that of master and servant, nor benefactor and protege. It is the sacred bond of chosen family, forged not in fire, but in kindness. Pip, for the first time in a long while, allows himself to rest, not in luxury, but in love. He returns to the marshes and begins to rebuild, not just his life, but his soul. Joe marries Biddy, the gentle heart who always saw through Pip's pretensions. Their quiet joy is not dramatic, not the stuff of novels or wealth or destiny. It is simply earned and deeply felt. Pip doesn't resent them. He is grateful. He begins to work honestly, modestly, and with purpose. Years pass. London no longer lures him with its glitter, and Miss Havisham's house, Satis House, stands ruined. In her final days, consumed by guilt and fire, literally, as her clothes catch flame in a dramatic symbolic turn, she dies with Pip at her side. She begs forgiveness, and though her manipulation of Estella remains haunting, Pip offers her what mercy he can. Estella, too, changes. She suffers through an unhappy marriage to Drummle, whose cruelty hardens and then finally cracks her heart. After his death, she wanders, not as a proud beauty, but as a woman tempered by pain. When Pip meets her again, years later, the two do not rekindle some fiery romance, but something better emerges, a recognition, a shared wound, and perhaps the quietest hint of something more. Dickens famously revised his ending, originally having Pip and Estella part ways forever, but softened it in the published version. The final meeting is ambiguous, but tender. They walk together through the overgrown ruins of Satis House, where ambition once lived and died. There is no promise, no wedding bells, only the faintest shimmer of peace. This resolution is no fairy tale. It doesn't offer Pip the dreams of his youth, but something better, perspective. He learns to live without illusions, to love without condition, to seek meaning in the small, steady things. He doesn't escape the systems of society, but he understands them now. And that understanding, as quiet as it may seem, is a kind of freedom. Great Expectations ends not with triumph or tragedy, but with a whisper of grace. It's a story about the journey from blindness to sight, from selfishness to humility, from yearning to acceptance. And it's in this quiet arc that Dickens achieves something profound. He shows us that the dreams sold to us by society, wealth, status, romance, are often hollow. But if we can see beyond them, we may just find something real. Great Expectations is, in many ways, a novel about disappointment, but not in the way that makes us cynical. It's about the kind of disappointment that clears the fog from our eyes and reveals the world not as we imagined it, but as it truly is. Pip, like so many of us, begins with illusions about wealth, love, class, and his own importance. He believes there is a ladder to climb, a prize to win, a person to become. But what he learns, slowly, painfully, is that character is not something bestowed by money or refined by manners. It is forged in how we treat others when there is nothing to gain. The novel critiques the rigid social hierarchy of Victorian England with precision. The justice system that favors the well-spoken criminal Compeyson over the rough but loyal one, Magwitch. The way wealth hides cruelty in the drawing room, while poverty reveals kindness in the forge. The obsession with appearances and gentility that blinds people to goodness. All of these are threads in Dickens's indictment of class prejudice. Yet Dickens does not preach revolution or scream for anarchy. His message is more intimate. He asks readers to look inward, to evaluate the expectations we carry, those handed to us by family, by society, by ourselves. He asks us to recognize the cost of ambition when it is untethered from empathy. He reminds us that redemption is not only possible, but often found in the most unexpected places. Joe Gargery is the novel's moral compass, not because he is loud or clever or worldly, but because he is constant. He embodies the quiet strength of someone who knows who he is. In a world obsessed with becoming someone else, Joe simply remains. And it is that simplicity that eventually saves Pip. Miss Havisham, in contrast, shows what happens when we live entirely in the past. Her life becomes a mausoleum to betrayal, and in raising Estella to break men's hearts, she perpetuates the cruelty she suffered. Her arc is one of deep tragedy, but also of warning. Living in pain too long, she shows us, can turn grief into vengeance. Estella, too, is a victim and a symbol. She is the product of manipulation, raised without affection, taught to view love as a game. Her own arc of suffering, self-awareness, and eventual change is perhaps the quietest but most haunting. In the end, when she and Pip walk together, their scars are visible but no longer bleeding. That moment is not romantic in the conventional sense. It is something rarer, an earned understanding. And what of Magwitch? The convict who terrifies Pip in the graveyard becomes the true architect of his fortune, not just financially, but morally. Magwitch's love is crude, even embarrassing to Pip at first, but it is real. And when Pip comes to see that, he is liberated from his false expectations. In caring for Magwitch, Pip is no longer performing the role of a gentleman. He becomes one. Dickens's genius lies in this. He takes a story that could have been melodrama. A boy becomes rich, falls in love, loses everything, and turns it into a mirror. A mirror for the reader, a mirror for society. It's not just about Pip. It's about all of us who have mistaken ambition for virtue, love for possession, success for character. The title, Great Expectations, is almost ironic. Pip's great expectations nearly ruin him, and yet, through ruin, he finds something better. Not greatness, but grace. In the final lines, Pip says, "I saw no shadow of another parting from her." The ambiguity of that sentence has sparked debate for over a century. Does it mean they stay together? That they part forever? Dickens doesn't say, because perhaps the ending isn't about what happens next. It's about what has happened, about Pip's journey from ignorance to awareness, from selfishness to compassion. That journey is the true reward. And for us, the readers, the great expectation is not that life will turn out the way we hoped. It is that through empathy, forgiveness, and humility, we might become something better than we were. In the quiet close of great expectations, as the dust of heartbreak and forgiveness settles, we are left not with grandeur, but with something far gentler, a sense of quiet understanding. Pip, once so desperate to rise above his origins, finally stands with both feet on the ground, no longer reaching toward illusions, but embracing the solid truths that have shaped him. He has come home, not to a place, but to a clearer version of himself. The world Dickens paints is imperfect and often unkind, yet it is also capable of great softness. Joe's unwavering kindness, Biddy's quiet wisdom, even Magwitch's fierce, flawed love, all remind us that the deepest transformations are born not in moments of triumph, but in the steady rhythm of compassion. It is through these ordinary mercies that Pip is redeemed, and it is through witnessing them that we, too, are changed. As the final chapter drifts into view, there is no triumphant fanfare, no grand declaration of destiny. Instead, Pip and Estella walk side by side, not as the people they once hoped to be, but as the people they have become. There is no promise, only presence, and that perhaps is enough. The light fades softly on the riverbank. Shadows lengthen, but do not frighten. There is peace in the ambiguity, comfort in the stillness. And as we close the book, we are not left clinging to answers, but breathing a little more slowly, a little more deeply, having journeyed through a story that echoes with the quiet truth. Life rarely gives us what we expect, but if we are patient, if we're kind, it may give us something better. So let us step gently from these pages, carrying not the weight of expectation, but the quiet light of understanding. Let it glow. Let it rest.